Hello and welcome everyone to today's Investor Q&A with Chris and Mick from Fremantle Seaweed. My name is Temin. I'm one of the campaign managers here at Birchal. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners for the land from which I'm beaming to you today. So Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with the Fremantle Seaweed team preparing for their campaign, and I personally am beyond excited to see, what could happen if we start feeding everyone seaweed, as I'm sure most of you are too. So I know you're all a lot more excited to hear from Chris and Mick, but a little note from Birchal first. As the licensed intermediary for the offer, Birchal Financial Services is working with Fremantle Seaweed on their upcoming crowdsource funding offer. For many of you who may be new to this on this call today, CSF or equity crowdfunding is a relatively new form of fundraising in Australia that allows startups and small businesses to raise capital from a larger number of smaller or retail investors and wholesale and sophisticated investors as well, through an online platform, which is Birchal. So instead of seeking funding from traditional methods such as banks or venture capitalists, companies can actually turn to the general public, often their communities, to raise money in exchange for equity in their business, which is really exciting. The information and discussion within this webinar is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as advice or a recommendation to invest. Please do your own research. Always consider the offer document and general CSF risk warning before making an investment. And all this information is over on birchal.com as well. So today's session is going to run through a bit of a presentation from these guys here, approximately 15-20 minutes, all about Fremantle Seaweed, where they come from, what they're looking to do with their capital raise, and then we'll switch to the Q&A session. So you'll see that little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Pop any questions you have in during the call, and then we'll go through them at the Q&A time. We are recording today's session as well, so if you need to jump off early, the recording will be sent around to everyone, so you can share it far and wide. That's enough from me. Over to you guys.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Temin. So my name's Chris, co-founder and CEO of Fremantle Seaweed.
And my name's Mick, and I'm also obviously a co-founder and operations.
So we're dialing in from Wajak Budja. So that picture on the screen is Birchal Nara. And I guess for acknowledgement to country, I would really recommend everyone just to jump on birchalnara.org, and there's some amazing lore and stories about Coburn Sound, but as we call it, Birchal Nara. So yeah, really, I guess, honoured to sort of sit in front of everyone. We've been really humbled by the amount of expressions of interest we've received. It's pretty awesome that, we've built these building blocks, I guess, Mick, and we are seaweed farmers. We're out in the water, and now we're here in front of you guys.
Yeah, look, I think Chris and I have been building the company over almost the last 4 years. We've pretty much just been working really hard to grow it to what it is now. We had no idea that there was that much interest out there. We had no idea that there were so many people that were aligned with our dream. And it, as Chris is saying, it's been really humbling, I must admit. But it's fantastic to see that there is so many people on the same page.
So we've got a little presentation here that we'll run through. This first shot, really good aerial shot of our seaweed farm, or aquaculture lease, which is just off the beach at Seaweed O'Connor Beach, for those people who know the Fremantle area. So it's a fully approved lease through DPIRD or WA Fisheries. We're licensed to grow 15 different types of seaweed. And this image is us setting up our long lines, which is how we grow our seaweed. So a long line is basically a 200-metre rope in our lease, and it is under tension between 2 anchors and 2 mussel floats. So yeah, it gives a bit of an overview of how we do it. All right, I'll jump across. Look, just a bit of a current position of where we're at. So we've been awarded a $4 million government grant through the state of Western Australia. It's a match grant, so we need to provide match funding. Not all from equity raising. It can also be from other federally funded grants and R&D tax offset. It's all set out in a grant agreement. As I said, 32-hectare aquaculture lease. Had successful grow-out trials for 3 seaweed species. some good product trials. Mick's been sending seaweed off to different restaurants. We're like, all these things are amazing. They're really good building blocks, but without our seaweed scientist, Dr. Margie Rule, feels like we'd be nothing. She's definitely a huge part of the picture. As everyone knows, commenced a $2 million Birchal crowdsource funding raise. The offer document goes live on Tuesday, the 27th. Also, really exciting, we have these 2 non-binding MOUs for an expansion lease, which is an ex-pearling aquaculture lease north of Broome in Western Australia. I think to put this opportunity in perspective, currently the biggest producer of Asparagopsis in Australia, in the world, is Sea Forest in Tasmania. They have a 1,600 hectare lease, an ex-mussel farm, so we would be more than doubling that production capability. And then beyond that, we have an MOU to form a JV or a partnership with an Indonesian seaweed farmer, where it's repurposing existing seaweed farms in Indonesia that currently grow Euchema gracilaria to grow Asparagopsis. Very early days for both. There's lots more development there, but it just kind of gives us that opportunity to scale. So I'll go to the next slide. A little bit about why we're doing this. So it's a climate emergency, as everyone knows. It's caused by greenhouse gas emissions. It's not just carbon dioxide, it's also methane. But we've also got, on the other hand, food security, which contributes to this, to climate change, and the fact that we're clearing lots of land to grow food sources. So we've got these 2 major problems of our time that we really believe that seaweed can address a portion of it. So it has 2 components. We've got the livestock methane emissions. The CSIRO developed this technology, basically, where it's Asparagopsis seaweed that grows abundantly and endemically in Australia, up through Indonesia, also over to Hawaii and the Pacific. It's an introduced or invasive species in the Mediterranean. But we're looking at 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions from livestock, and Asparagopsis currently has this huge ability to reduce methane emissions up to 80%. CSIRO have commercialized that technology, and it's now run by Future Feed, and they operate the license. So Asparagopsis growers will need to get a license through Future Feed to be able to supply Asparagopsis seaweed to cattle farmers. But there's this other side where there's other problem we're trying to address, which is food security. We're putting huge pressure on global food systems at the moment, whether it's an increased demand for protein, clearing more land to be able to grow more cows or sheep, goats, whatever it is. And we do need to feed a growing world. The population's forecast to get up to 9 billion in the next 10 to 20 years. Can't remember the exact date. But we have this opportunity with seaweed, marine biomass, and not only as an edible product, which we are growing edible seaweeds now that we supply to restaurants, but also like this, ability to make fertilizers, just to create that biomass out of the ocean in a sustainable way that doesn't, create land clearing, add fertilizers and nutrients to the ocean. So it's amazing what seaweed can do. And I'm going to get everyone to look at that photo on the right. So that's on the back of our boat, Champagne. This is what we call seeded substrate. So you'll see that brown tube. That's just a PVC pipe with twine wrapped around it. And then that twine is getting unraveled onto a grow rope. That grow rope hangs off those backbones, those long lines that we have installed in the water. And that's how we're growing seaweed. That there is Eclonia radiata, or golden kelp. But yeah, if everyone can just sort of take a bit of a mental note of that's how we sort of do it at scale. There's different methods for different seaweeds, but as you'll see in this next slide, so we're pretty honest where we're at with Asparagopsis cultivation. It's a new seaweed that hasn't ever really been cultivated at an industrial scale. There is companies in South Australia, Tasmania, over in Hawaii and America that are growing it as well. And there's a few different ways to grow it. You can grow it inshore, or can grow it on a marine lease on ropes like this, but we haven't developed that seeded substrate, and that's the key to it. There is further R&D to figure out what we're doing for kelp, where we get little baby kelp to grow on twine. We need to do that for Asparagopsis. Mick's leading that charge with Margie at the hatchery. I don't know if you want to maybe an update of where we're at with that process.
Yeah, we've definitely made some advancements. We've found some pretty interesting things during the life cycle of the Asparagopsis. But Chris is right. The mission is to be able to create the seeded substrate so that we can really scale up the farm. We've been able to follow Asparagopsis through its life cycle, but we're only at this stage. We're only at the point of being able to get it to create the small plant, and from that we need to work out how to be able to do that in volumes. One of us is going to crack this soon. It's definitely something that a lot of very clever people are trying to solve very quickly. When we do, we believe that we're in an incredible position to be able to take up that opportunity. At the moment, what we're doing is exactly what this slide shows, where we're just using fragments of the Asparagopsis, and then we're growing that out further to get greater biomass, where we can then prune and get regrowth from. But we are all working incredibly hard to crack, I should say, the whole life cycle of Asparagopsis and to create the seeded substrate.
Yeah, I'm probably getting to a 10-minute warning here, so we'll go into more details. There's a lot more details about this in the offer document, the inputs where we get to this, but I'll just go that big figure, the global market, from what our calculations are. The global known market is this total addressable market, and it's all the feedlot and dairy cows in Australia, US, Canada, and Europe. We haven't counted for other huge markets like China and India, because it's hard to get a grasp of the numbers of cows there and how we can get our product there. But like, it's 800,000 tons of Asparagopsis would be needed, which is $20 billion worth of Asparagopsis. That would need 500,000 hectares of seaweed farming. So it is a huge opportunity, but we're right at the start. As Mick was saying, we've got to scale up. We've got the right people working on it. We've got a seaweed farm. We've got areas to expand, but it's just going to be, lots of, I guess, dedicated time and hours to figuring it out, how to do it at scale. But we can grow edible seaweeds. This is Caulerpa lenticulare, or sea grapes. It's delicious, straight from the ocean. You can eat it. It's kind of got like a salty oyster sort of flavor, pops in your mouth. We discovered it when we were looking for Asparagopsis. We kind of tapped Margie on the shoulder when we were diving, and we went, "What about that one?" She went, "Yeah, that's Caulerpa." So we had a taste and went, "Wow, that's exciting." And the feedback from local chefs that we've done small product trials with, they love it. So, one thing, it's again early days. It's a very emerging industry for Australia, seaweed. But we'd love to see, chefs are kind of describing it as vegan caviar, and imagine like a caviar tin that you could buy at the supermarket one day that has these sea grapes in it. So that's where we'd love to get to one day. But to start with, Caulerpa will be getting supplied to the local restaurant market through a seafood wholesaler, very much like a business-to-business model. As we develop that interest, as we develop the amount that we can produce from our aquaculture lease, we'll start developing those further market pathways. Also a difficult market to comprehend because it's all so new. The main figure is we currently import $40 million of seaweed in Australia, mostly dried seaweeds like nori, used for sushi, or you've got other seaweeds you can put in seaweed salads. But there's never been a fresh seaweed product available. There is a few people who grow seaweed in New South Wales, but it's still being processed into like a value add product, where we're looking at supplying a fresh product. So it's from what we can see, if we supply to WA, we wouldn't even be able to grow enough to hit that that's just the restaurant market of $1.1 million. We can currently grow on production forecast about 600,000 of edible seaweeds, not just Caulerpa. We can do a couple others like Ulva and kelp. So just going to use the funds quickly. That's just a close-up of the long line, what it looks like. That is called a mussel float. It's a 290-litre float. Basically, the way it works is we've got a big heavy anchor called a stingray anchor because it embeds its way into the sand like a stingray. Then there's 10 metres of chain, 20-metre riser rope to that mussel float, and then there's a 200-metre long line that goes over to the other side and back down. They stay in the ocean. So we currently got 4 of those long lines in our aquaculture lease. We can scale up to 22 according to our design. And then we hang our grow ropes off of that long line. So I think maybe there's a bit of a misconception that that's how we grow the seaweed on those backbone long lines. We don't. We have grow ropes that hang off of them. Use of funds will definitely be to go to that 22 long lines. So we've got a pre-approved lease area down in Henderson, for those people who know WA, to put a containerized hatchery. It'll probably be 2 40-foot containers, so we can get ocean water straight into the containers as a flow-through circuit. So part of the funds will be to buy a couple of containers, which is a pretty inexpensive way of doing it. It also proves up that model to scale, where we can pick up a container that we know will have the right conditions to have a hatchery, and then take it to the aquaculture leases. This isn't the boat we're building, but it's an example of a boat that we're building. So that's a mussel boat in New Zealand. The way we're going about this is we're aquaculture operators, we're out on the boat, and that's how we're going to solve this huge new industry opportunity for seaweed. Is we're going to repurpose existing aquaculture operations. And a really good example is in New Zealand, they farm mussels not actually for food, but for medical extracts. A boat like this could do about 8 kilometres of rope a day. So you'll see those kind of 5 uprights, their hydraulic arms lift up on a long line, and then it creeps along a long line. You have separate systems that separate out. So it's kind of almost like you see it on a grain farm where there's like a combine harvester, like it's using machines to mechanize and speed up the processes to be able to get that scale. Also, we'll be building the team, working on R&D, as Mick was talking about, but also people to work the ropes. So then the final one is these 2 non-binding MOUs where we're looking to, increase our portfolio of assets to be able to grow more seaweed in WA and internationally. Now, I think that's it. I've gone way over time. Sorry, Temin. But yeah, over to you.
No, that is completely fine. And look, we've got a number of questions to go through. You're well on time as well. Please, everybody, if you've got any more questions throughout this Q&A when we kick it off, just pop them in the box and we'll hopefully get to as many as we can. So going through, I've tried to kind of break them up a bit, but I wanted to ask a few questions about like the company's operations in general. We've had some questions about, whether you have international operations, and then as well as that, is your expansion kind of limited to WA? What is the current state and what are you planning to do?
Yeah, so currently we have operations in Western Australia in our 32 hectares here in Fremantle. That's our only current operational lease. And then we have these, agreements or MOUs to like develop further leases. So one of them is north of Broome. That's a 3,600 hectare lease. And then the international one would be to form a joint venture or partnership. It's something where it's like the legal structure is pretty complex. We'd have to get lawyers involved to really figure that out. But what then we're talking about in Indonesia is repurposing existing seaweed farms that grow Euchema and Gracilaria to grow Asparaginopsis. Our scientist Margie is involved with that project. It was a really good report that came out. If everyone wants to Google it, it's by a organisation called Hatch, and it was very much saying that there's lots of amazing opportunities with seaweed right now with bioplastics, biofuels. There should be more investment in primary production because that's the bottleneck. We can't grow enough seaweed at the moment to be able to realise, there's a really awesome bioplastic company here in Perth called Ulu, and we'd love to supply them with seaweed, but we just don't have the production yet. So we're scaling up as fast as we can, but also in a in a sustainable way.
Oh, of course. Thank you. And we have some more questions here about, I guess risks to the business or to your operations. What happens during winter? And do you guys retrieve the long lines when storms, etc., move in?
We've actually gone through. We're only just coming up for a year of the farm actually being out in the ocean. It took us 2.5 years to get the license and the lease approved. Last winter was pretty stormy here in Perth, and we had some fairly sizable waves and conditions move through. We left one backbone in to see what would happen. We were pretty happy to see that at the end of winter, there was absolutely no movement on the anchoring system. We actually continued to grow seaweed through the whole of winter, so we were completely operational in all of the stormy parts. We wanted to see the effect of the storm on the seaweed, if we got seaweed damage, if we lost seaweed. We have an amazing spot that we've chosen that seems to be fairly well protected. The water conditions are ideal for us to be able to grow. The depths are ideal, but it seems to have quite good protection. And Chris and I were both aware of this from the start, that we needed a spot that had good protection and could handle all sorts of conditions, because it's really not profitable for us to be able to pull all our gear out after the summer and leave it out over winter, because we're really not utilizing, growth over the winter months. We're also identifying what seaweeds grow at different times of the year. So we might not necessarily be able to grow some of our asparagus in the middle of winter, although we have found some of it will grow. But there are other seaweeds on our list of 16 that we can grow. So really, we're just learning more and more as to what grows, what can handle the conditions. I think we were both pretty surprised at how robust asparagus was. We did expect to lose some in some of the storms, and we didn't. So initially, it's looking really good.
No, that's great to hear. Now, how big would you like, in a dream world, Fremantle Seaweed to get? Are you looking to rule the industry in Australia? Obviously, it's a dream, it's a mission, but yeah, we'd love to hear
it. We really believe our project can have a significant impact to reducing greenhouse gas emissions through this asparagus. It's an amazing Australian innovation developed by CSIRO, and they just need people like us to grow it. So it does have a huge potential to scale. But it's something I said before, we have to do these things in a sustainable way. It's a new industry for Australia. We don't want to see, millions of hectares of aquaculture leases littering up the ocean. We need to make sure that it's done with, social license in mind. Not a mentor of mine, I wish he was, but I've always been inspired by Yvonne Chouinard from Patagonia, and his business methodology, or like the way he goes about it. It was like, we don't want to grow to be fat. We want to grow to be strong. And, for us, it's about really getting the small stuff right, figuring out how to grow seaweed at a small scale here, but still, with that ability to scale up when we're ready.
Awesome, thank you. Now, I've just seen a bunch of questions coming through about key terms of the offer and things related to the offer, so I might just jump in really quickly and answer those ones. In terms of the key terms of the offer, so the valuation, the minimum, maximum, and share price, that will all be like public knowledge when the offer goes live next week. So we're currently still in the expression of interest period where the Fremantle Seeder, seeking feedback and, trying to see what they might be able to achieve throughout this process. So also keep in mind, these are all early stage businesses that are raising through equity crowdfunding. And a risk to equity crowdfunding is dilution if the team decides to go through further rounds of funding. But that's the same with all companies. If they decide to offer more shares, it gets diluted. So those are just two questions that came through as well. We had another question as well about future projections. So the way that it's governed under CSF is that ASIC, who's the governing body, takes a really firm view about future projections regarding revenue, return on investment, things like that. So a lot of these ventures, as I said, are early stage and may not have even started trading yet. So it is misleading to include that information in the offer. So it's really just an exciting opportunity for investors to get in at that early stage. Yeah, but you know, as you heard from the guys, like you have a mission, you believe in the mission, you've got the operations and the team to do what you've got to do. So it's on the investors to do your due diligence, read the offer document, the company constitution, subscription agreement, and the risk warning, and then make the decision for yourself. Fabulous. Sorry, I'll circle back to you guys now. We have a few questions here regarding like how long your lease is. And are there any risks to that lease?
Yes, so the regulator here is DEPA, Department of Primary Industries, Regional Development, which Fisheries, West Australian Fisheries is a part of, have an aquaculture lease and license. The lease is for 20 years, but we have to show production. So if we don't produce any seaweed after 5 years, they'll take the lease back. So like we do have to show that we are using the lease. It stops people from, like I guess, a land grab and just staking out the ocean.
Awesome. And then on that note, do you have any customers already interested or lined up for your Asparagopsis? And are they supporting you to scale up the production?
So no, not for Asparagopsis. We don't have customers at this stage. To sell Asparagopsis, you have to have a future feed license. So there is a risk to that side of it, that us without a license, we're not allowed to supply it. There is another way, like a channel, we can supply it to an existing licensee, and there is one here in Western Australia called Sea Stock, and then there's others around Australia. For us, and it's detailed in the offer document, like it's an absolute priority that as we're working on figuring out how to scale up our production of Asparagopsis, we also need to do that work on developing the market for it. Part of that use of funds in the team is to put a business development manager in there, someone who can actually start looking at feedlot and dairy operators who'd be interested in our product. We have put in I guess it's an expression of interest with Future Feed to get a license, but it's very early days.
Awesome, thank you. We've got another question here about the lease. Is there, when you say expanding, in WA, is there like lots of room for you to expand just where you are, or will you kind of have to set up different farms along the coast?
Currently in Coban Sound or Derbil Nara, we've probably identified one other spot. We do need fairly specific conditions for growing of the seaweed. We have identified one other spot that we're looking at. There are other available lease sites within the Sound that we don't believe are probably going to sustain some of the seaweeds we want to grow. So we're being highly selective as to where we go. But the expansion sites that we're looking at are sort of north and south of Perth. But again, Chris and I have been looking at different sites for at least 2 years now and doing feasibility studies on them. We just want to make sure that we get it right. The process of getting a lease site takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. So we don't want to apply for something that we find can't actually sustain the growth of what we need. We did a lot of studies with the 32-hectare site that we have at the moment, and we actually got some UWA students involved to do feasibility studies as well as ourselves, and the feedback all came back saying that we could grow Asparagopsis and other seaweeds. That didn't actually mean that we could. It wasn't until we did our first trials and saw that we could. And as we continue to do trials of other seaweeds, we're just finding more and more out as to what our site can sustain. But the most important thing is that it can actually grow the seaweed. It's not just a case of picking a body of water and then saying, right, we're growing seaweed. We're being pretty selective.
Awesome, thanks. So where are the best margins for your business? Is it seaweed for human consumption or for cattle?
So it's just kind of the strategy of ours is that we're growing edible seaweed, particularly Kulin lentifera, which is easy to grow because it's vegetative propagation. So you can get a small amount, grow it to a larger biomass increase, keep on, sectioning that out throughout the farm. There's a product so you can get Kulin lentifera. It's marketed as Sydney sea grapes, but it isn't imported from Vietnam, and it's being sold at $140 a kilogram. So it's a premium product. The higher margin is there, but it's not the same opportunity and scale that Asparagopsis is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The edible seaweed market in Australia, as Chris was saying before, $40 million worth of seaweed is imported a year. That's either freeze-dried, frozen, or pickled. Australia hasn't had access to an edible seaweed market before, so it's actually really hard for us to say just how big that market is. We believe that once there is the opportunity to have fresh seaweed, there's probably going to be a lot of people that have never tried it before. If it's easily accessible, that will also open up a much greater market as well. So it's a little bit hard to say how big that market is, but we're from the impressions that we've got so far, we see that as a pretty exciting market as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Now we have another question here regarding the seaweed farming industry. You know, it's grown quite substantially over the last decade. What is the barrier you see for entry to new players? Is it location? Is it operational efficiency?
So it's regulations. Getting an aquaculture lease is difficult, and it should be. Like it's one of those things where you need to prove that you're not going to have a detrimental environmental impact to where you're growing seaweed. So we do something called a baseline survey, where we take a snapshot of the lease before we install any equipment there, and then yearly just monitor those same locations to make sure we're not all of a sudden all the local reefs are just covered in Asparagopsis or Clerpa, which they haven't been so far, which is good, and unlikely to happen. So yeah, that's the biggest barrier to entry, because there is New South Wales, for example, that there's a couple of seaweed farms in the approval process. They're being referred to EPA for assessment, which is $500,000 straight up to do an EPA assessment. So we're sympathetic with our sisters and brothers over in New South Wales for getting seaweed farms up and running. That's the main barrier, is the lease.
Can you provide a little bit more intel into the competitive landscape and what sets you apart?
Yeah, so we are a member of the Australian Sustainable Seaweed Alliance, ASA, with most of our competitors. Being an emerging industry, it makes a lot more sense for us to work together to solve a lot of the challenges that we're all working on. Saying that, everyone's always still got their secret squirrel stuff that they're working on. But we believe, like, through that industry body, they have federal funding, $8 million to develop the National Hatchery Network. Hatcheries basically supply that seeded substrate I was talking about, and develop the methodology. Margie, our scientist, is the program lead for the National Hatchery Network, which is great. But you see, you've got Sea Forest, Tasmania. They are the pioneers of Asparagopsis. They deserve the credit they're getting, because it's hard to be a pioneer. They probably had a 2 or 3 year jump on anyone else, I think. Maybe not CH4 Global, but anyway, like, it's good to see the amount of press they're getting on the ABC. And I encourage everyone to watch. There's 2 ABC programs. There was a Landline and a Australian Story, both based about the founder of Sea Forest, Sam Elsom. So it's a really good in-depth look at Asparagopsis and where we're at. Then we've got CH4 Global in South Australia, who have just done a big capital raise to do an inshore facility. And I didn't quite touch on it before. We are growing seaweed in a marine aquaculture lease in the ocean. You can also grow Asparagopsis inshore, another part of the life cycle called the tetrasporophyte. We're not doing that because it has its own challenges, but also opportunities. Main one is quite a bit of capex straight up to get a big tank farm up and running. In WA, we've got sea stock here. I was at a vocab yesterday. It was a big conference, and I bumped into the guys from Sea Stock and Tom Putty. It makes sense for us all to work together. From what I understand about Sea Stock, they are more the inshore model. They're not growing seaweed on seaweed farms, aquaculture leases, but they do have a future feed license. And then in the edible sector, there is Dr. Pia Winberg, which has been a Shell Systems, Southern New South Wales. She is the queen of seaweed in Australia, has built an awesome project and brand and products from Ulva, which is sea lettuce, which we can grow as well. So that's the competitive landscape. I think there's plenty of room for everyone at the moment.
Yeah, awesome. So we did just have one question come through, whether you could repeat the details of the ABC show that you just mentioned.
So Landline, I think it aired on the 28th of June last year, and then the Australian Story with Sam Nelson was maybe a month or two after it. So yeah, if you jump on ABC iView, just Google Sea Forest, and there should be two separate ones, Landline and Australian Story.
Awesome, thanks. We've had a few more questions come through regarding risks to the business. Are there any concerns about, and I might butcher this, Kwinana port or the submarine industry to your business?
So, yeah, this AUKUS Pact, where the US, Australia, and the UK are heavily militarizing against the potential threat of China, means that there's going to be a nuclear submarine base about 15 to 20 k's away. With that comes, of course, that risk that there could be some sort of nuclear spill. So we don't have nuclear subs in Australia at the moment, or the Navy doesn't, but I'm sure there is nuclear subs that operate in these waters. They're just not Australian. Sorry, that I've probably gone way too deep into that. This is about Westport, wasn't it? So there's a new container terminal getting built in Kwinana called Westport. We're on the Aquaculture Council of Western Australia, so we're a stakeholder for Westport. They do have to brief us on their project updates. The latest update from them was they've done I think it's their pre-feasibility study. So it took them about 5 years. Next is detailed design and feasibility study, which is going to be another 5 to 10 years. And from the briefing that Westport gave us, Western Australia has to have this container terminal for the future of WA. But then you hear the other side when everyone's like, the Fremantle port's got plenty of capacity to have more containers. It's just the road links in and out. Either way, there is a risk that when they're dredging, they will put what's the word?
Silt.
Yeah, silt in the water, which will affect sunlight getting to the seaweed. We would be in that impact zone. It would probably be for a year, maximum 2 year period. We'd be seeking compensation if that does occur.
We've had sort of some preliminary discussions about using seaweed as a filtration system whilst this process is going on as well. So we're watching the space pretty closely. But as Chris was saying, it is some time off. By the time that goes ahead, we'll be a lot more advanced in our operations, and possibly our ideas of using seaweed as filtrations to pretty much minimise the silt going across the sound. We may have a really good opportunity there to find out some more stuff.
Yeah, brilliant. Speaking of contamination, we have a message here about someone thinking that CY O'Connor is a dog beach. Are there any contamination risks with that?
Dog feed will matter.
No, the city council is pretty particular about everyone cleaning up after their dogs. We are at least 250 metres offshore at our closest point. So yeah, we certainly don't have any concerns about there being any contamination by dogs or CY kind of beach itself.
Yeah. And then in terms of more sensitivities to the seaweed itself, will the changes in water temperature over time, as expected with climate change, have an impact on the seaweed?
Look, that's a really good question. We've just had some fairly extreme conditions come through Perth this year. We've seen probably some of the hottest water move through that we've seen in a long time. We're diving at least every 2 weeks on our collection sites. We do transect surveys. We take a lot of photos. They go back. We basically look at exactly the same spot over the course of the year every 2 weeks. We see what's growing, what's not growing. We've definitely identified this season some bleaching. There's definitely been some very warm water that's moved through, but what we've been able to learn from that is at what point in the water column the seaweed has been damaged. So we have the ability to drop down to 7, almost 8 metres at our deepest point on our lease site. I think what it's kind of shown us is that if we have a repeat of these conditions, we'd probably make sure that our first grow column would be at least 1.5 meters deep, where we're not going to get that top surface heat. The heat that we saw that affected the reefs at the back of Garden Island were in probably 0.5 meter of water. But in saying that, we have seen that the condition of a lot of seaweed around that was also affected by the heat. So again, what we see is absolutely crucial is rather than us trying to reinvent the wheel, we're learning from nature. So we're constantly learning everything we can as to how the natural ecosystem works, and then we replicate that. So it's been a really interesting learning curve. We haven't seen that sort of effect on the reef previously. I think maybe 2006, 2011, we had sort of similar hot water conditions move through. But again, it's just an incredible opportunity to learn more and to take that knowledge that we have to really expand out. And we learn more and more each season, and we just keep getting more and more knowledge, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic. So just out of curiosity, what is the additional processing required to turn Asparagopsis into cattle feed?
So you spin the water off. So we can currently do that in a washing machine on spin dry, and you don't do that to your mum's washing machine because you break it. But that's how we do it. Currently, at a bigger scale, would be like an industrial centrifuge. So it's the same thing. It's just a big drum that spins water off. So the weight will go from 1 kilogram will turn into about 100 grams of Asparagopsis. That is then immersed in oil. There is a couple of methods according to the future feed methodology on how to do it. So that's one of them. It's probably the cheaper way. That oil, the bromoform, then comes out of the seaweed into the oil, and then that oil is tested for the bromoform content, but also is then blended with cattle feed. And I was told by a feedlot operator that they do that. There's other oils that they use for nutritional reasons that get blended in. And I saw a video of it. It was just like a big, it was just a big pile of feed in like a hopper, and then they've just got a front end loader kind of mixing it. The other way is to freeze dry it, and that is, according to future feed, like the gold standard. That basically locks in the bromoform, but also all the other good stuff in Asparagopsis, and then this is freeze dried. You can kind of just like crumble it into a dust that gets added into another feed. It's always important to remember that it's a supplement, so it's like 0.5% per day of the cow's daily intake of food. It's about 60 grams. So yeah, that's the processing.
Thanks. So we have a question here about the team and I guess your scaling plan. So if you were to max out your raise and then along with your grant, kind of how many employees would you envision bringing on board, and like what skills and roles would you need to scale production?
Yeah, so as Nick said before, there's a hatchery technician required to operate a hatchery. Aquaculture lease operators, we're really lucky that being in a metro area, probably about 5 k's from where our lease is South Metro TAFE, and they offer an aquaculture diploma, which is very handy. So there's a skilled workforce ready to go. Then, like I was saying, that business development manager piece, we, as much as possible, I mean, we need to keep things lean. You don't want to just hire the whole management team just because you can. Like we'll keep it pretty streamlined just to start with, especially when it's only, we're talking about 32 hectares and have to work on these commercial agreements to expand. So yes, so currently we have 2 full-time employees, Mick and I, 2 scientists, Margie and Mike Brull, work as consultants. We have a chair that's part-time, and kind of your standard financial and legal advisors. I think we both quite like that model, that contract model, where you're not paying like full-time salaries when you don't need them just yet. And it means you get access to people who are really skilled for a fraction of the price.
I think the other thing that we're really interested in is very multi-skilled people in the team. So Chris and I do everything. We do a bit of everything. And in that, we see how valuable it is to have other multi-skilled people within the team. So our hatchery technician would also come out on dive collections, work on the farm, be part of the whole process. And I think we both understand by doing that, you have a much greater idea of the process, how it all works, much greater input and value within the team. So that's the sort of people that we'd be scaling up with. And we have no shortage of people interested, which is great. So yeah.
That's great. So we've got a bunch of questions here, which I'm going to have to send over to you guys to answer afterwards. But we have some questions here about, the farmers in general, like kind of what the price difference would be between, using normal grain or then grade with Asparagopsis, and what the benefit would be for them.
Yeah, so it's all about reducing methane emissions is the benefit, why we're doing it. It's currently $25 a day is what I believe everyone in the industry's worked off the original future feed figures for 60 grams a day, which ends up being about $1 to $1.50 per day per cow. Now that's obviously an expense that a lot of cattle feedlot farmers and dairy farmers also just keep in mind that this supplement only is for feedlot and dairy. It doesn't at this stage work for open pasture grazing cattle. Anyway, so you've got this $1 to $1.50 a day. What we need to see is government incentives to reduce that price, whether it's an ACCU, so a carbon credit. There's no methodology in the emissions reduction fund for an approved ACCU for Asparagopsis, but I believe that there's one in the works. And that's a really good mechanism to reduce the cost because the cattle farmer gets the ACCU, not the seaweed farmer. Then there's a premium product play that all of a sudden, like Coles and Woolies are branding milk and beef products that are methane free, like people might have seen recently with Sea Forest and grilled burgers. They sold their grilled methane free burgers. I bought one, it was like $1 extra. That's the premium one. And then maybe there'll be further incentives from government. The Meat and Livestock Australia, which is the industry body for cattle farmers, are saying that they are targeting to be carbon neutral by 2030. So there's not many options there's a couple of synthetic products that can be used, like Oliver, there's a couple of I don't believe are approved yet. And then Asparagopsis is that one, the natural product that can do it as well.
Awesome, thanks. In terms of the seaweed itself, are there any benefits from dried to wet seaweed, and any kind of biomedical pathways or impact of it? Potentially, you could point some of the viewers towards some literature if you know any.
Be worth looking at Dr. Pia Winberg's literature and products that she's doing out of Venus Shell Systems. I'm selling everyone else's companies, aren't I? But we just think she's awesome. And there was actually a really good ABC podcast with Richard Feidler, I believe, with Pia Winberg, and it's pretty gruesome, but she got scalped, her hair got caught in some sort of medical equipment, and I believe she was able to use some of her seaweed products to help the healing process. And it's like, there's definitely these awesome biomedical properties of seaweed. We're not, we're growing seaweed, we'll focus on that. We haven't developed these products yet.
We are really interested in being part of some studies which hopefully will be coming out over the coming months, looking into the health benefits of the edible seaweeds that we're growing, because we've identified the fact that there is no written information on anything to do with the edible seaweeds of Cockburn Sound. And we believe that if we're bringing out a food or a new food, that people need to know everything about it and what it has to offer. It can't just taste good. It has to have, pretty good backup behind it. Initially, we've kind of been given the indication that seaweed is a superfood, but we want to find out why. So rather than just saying it is a superfood, we want to be able to supply the information to back that up. So that's something that we're both pretty passionate about and excited about. We're very close in the process of being able to announce that, but not quite yet because we haven't quite sealed off on that agreement. But we have been working on that for over a year now. So
Wow.
yeah, we really want the holistic approach of not just bringing out a new food, but the fact that we can bring it out, also say what it's good for. People can then start to select different seaweeds for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so exciting. Watch this space. So, what kind of considerations do you have to take with the product when moving it from like ocean to storage? Does it have to be refrigerated?
At the moment, the initial trials that we've done, particularly with the callirpa, the sea grapes, we've been trialing some sort of transport systems of our own that we've come up with. We've worked out that we can pretty much bring it straight out of the ocean in the salt water from the ocean. Obviously, we don't want that temperature to rise too much because it's going to start to damage the seaweed's integrity. We're finding that if it goes into a cool room, at the moment, we're getting around about a week of still very high quality product. We have brought a bubbler system into this as well, just to aerate the water so that we're, again, giving it its best conditions to grow in. But a lot of that is actually going to be part of our studies that we're going to announce in coming months, because we also understand that that's also crucial for the food side and anything going into a restaurant. Obviously, chefs are very particular about what products they use. They need to know everything about them. So again, that's something that's going to come out that is pretty exciting. But at the moment, we are finding that yeah, as long as we keep it in the fresh salt water, we keep it in a cool room, we don't let it get hot. It's lasting fairly well.
Wow, that's awesome. And do you have any plans to supply seaweed to other companies for related or different purposes? There's an example of, say, manufacturing plastic alternatives, which companies like Ulu are exploring, or are those different varieties?
Yeah, and I caught up with Michael and Julia yesterday at a vocag, and we are, I don't think I've even briefed you on this yet. We can grow Gracilaria on our seaweed farm. We haven't yet. And yeah, watch this space. We'd love to do a collaboration with them. Yeah, we just reckon what they do is awesome. Bioplastics is actually a really good way to sequester carbon using seaweed. So yeah, definitely keen to do it.
I think what's probably coming out is that we are super passionate about the seaweed industry. Although we're probably other seaweed farms across Australia are seen it as our competitors. We're not really seeing it so much like that. We're seeing it as an incredible opportunity to grow this seaweed industry. It needs a lot of us. It needs diversification within that industry. And we're pretty keen to work with people. It took us 2.5 years to get our lease site. When we did, we paid a designer in Tasmania to design the farm with us and work out all the infrastructure. Fairly shortly after that, we started to get approached by other people that were potentially looking at putting seaweed farms in. We actually shared the farm design with other people because we believe that by promoting the industry, we're actually helping. We would love a co-op model where we're all working together. It's very smart for us all to work together rather than to individually try and solve a problem. We really want to grow the industry. There's enough room for everybody. There's enough water here. And we've got enough reasons to crack so many issues and problems that we can do in the ocean. So yeah, we're pretty excited and kind of honoured to work with all these different people. It's great.
And you know what they say, a rising tide lifts all boats, or something like that.
That's nautical terms.
Yeah.
Awesome. With that, we might leave it there. We'll wrap it up. So there are a number of questions that we didn't get to, but I will share those with the guys, and they can get back to you via email or potentially in the activity board on their Birchal page. Sorry. So, thank you so much, guys, for such a great presentation. It's really exciting to see what you've done and what you want to do moving forward. For everybody that joined today, thank you so much for your time. If you did have to jump off or whatnot, we'll share the recording around. Now, the Expression of Interest campaign for Fremantle Seaweed is still live until Monday night next week, so the 26th, and then the offer will open in private to those that have expressed interest on the Tuesday before opening to the public later that week. And when that launches, you'll have access to the offer document, all of the key terms of the offer. And I know the guys are really keen to have a chat with you all about that as well. So that is all from me. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.